Girl Georgie and Archie by Tanya Humphreys. Georgie stared out the window, but in her zoned-out state she was as blind as a person born with no corneas. The lights in the cavernous subway fuselage flickered and dimmed, alarming her from her reverie, for the light was an odd reddish amber, much like the embers in a dying fire. She had been drawn to the subway. It seemed more comforting than the cold, agoraphobic openness of the streets. She blinked as she took in her reflection, her skin so pale, her face was a moon, and her brown eyes huge and darkly shadowed. She was horrified to see herself with the face of a skeleton. It was a very bad omen. Fresh tears shimmered and the reflection wavered like a mirage on a midday August Texas highway. She ran her fingers through her pale gold boy's cut hair. The fingers were skeletal in the grim reflection. She tried to recapture the image of her true self, a natural, effortlessly pretty girl. She'd been born 12 years earlier and christened Amanda Lynn, named for a grandmother she didn't remember, and therefore felt no guilt for choosing to call herself Georgie instead, after her idol, George Lucas, whom she wanted to be like when she grew up. She pulled her hood up and down over her brows and slumped in the hard plastic seat and again glanced at the boy she pretended to be. Georgie didn't wear dresses or makeup or pink fuzzy hair scrunchies. She pretended to be a boy simply because she felt safer. Once, a little girl of about 8 or 9 squealed with delight and ran to her from across the grassy expanse of a pocket park, only to be disappointed that Georgie was not Justin Timberlake. She'd gradually made the metamorphosis during the 6 months after her older sister Carolina Joy disappeared. The detectives surmised a sexual predator recently released in a Toronto suburb was the culprit. The scrap of bloody lace found on the subway platform at the King Street station contained both Carolina Joy's and the sick bastard's DNA, though neither person was ever seen or heard from again. She had figured that her mother would be less likely to notice if she made the transformation a little bit at a time. But then again, perhaps her mother would be just as likely to notice purple tentacles complete with neon green suction cups growing out from Georgie's ears. It wasn't just the booze, though Georgie knew that good old Jack Daniels had been the catalyst that led like a stepping stone path through an increasingly darkening forest down into the comatose state she sort of existed in these days. The men that Florence brought home like stray dogs grew grosser and grosser. She went for the ruggedly handsome, often bearded lumberjack types oozing with testosterone. While Carolina Joy had been alive, the boyfriends were mostly decent types who happened to enjoy partying and booze fests as much as her mother, though the true binging mostly occurred on the weekends. After the disappearance, Florence fell ill. Georgie had cared for her as best as she could, bringing her chunky Campbell's soup, freshly laundered pajamas and sweats, and new copies of the Inquirer and the Star. Only the latter seemed touched. The jammies lay at the foot of the bed, the soup congealed, and the wastebasket filled with soggy tissues and pint bottles of cheap bourbon. The old MGM Las Vegas ashtray overflowed with butts. When she eventually crawled out from her stale and reeking sheets, Florence headed for the Stag's Gate, the stomp-in ground for the gents who worked the paper mill on that side of town. Florence's taste had gone downhill. It was only natural considering her appearance had too. The third one she'd brought home was worse than just drunk. He smelled rancid, like old skid-marked underpants left too long in a damp place. Could she mother not smell him? Couldn't she see the glazed look on his sweaty face? Her mother developed the same zombie glaze 3 days later when they at last re-emerged from the den of despair. Georgie had been in the kitchen washing the dishes. There were very few these days. The adults in the house didn't eat much. The guy, Santiago was his name, though he didn't look Hispanic to Georgie, had thick silver hair from a receding hairline, a pale, lined face grizzled with salt and pepper stubble, and watery, pale gray eyes entrenched in drooping bags. The eyes brightened, in not a good way, when he swayed into the kitchen and realized a young girl was there before him. It was as though Florence had never mentioned she had a daughter. His shiny wet lips turned upwards into a leer as he eyed her up and down, his eyes lingering on her flat chest as if trying to figure how old she was. His eyes morphed into the calculating wheels of a Vegas one-armed bandit as he lurched towards her. He raised a veiny pale hand towards her, the fingernails packed with dark crud. Georgie stepped back quickly, like a wary fawn from a fat white snake, and saw small purple bruises in the crook. A couple looked fresh. One appeared to be bleeding like an infected mosquito bite scratched too long and hard. She threw the Tupperware container she'd been washing into the sink, throwing a wave of soap bubbles onto the windowsill, and scooched under the arm and out the door. Ike. She shuddered at the memory. And her rite of passage had begun. Florence only commented on her daughter's appearance once. Her raspy cigarette-addled voice, a voice suited to a woman 20 years older, was, "Why the hair? You look like a dyke." Georgie didn't know what a dyke was besides a dam or something in Holland, so she Googled. HM. The desire to be a boy then and there was set in hardening cement. Within the next month, she wore only jeans, tees, and hoodies. She considered wearing a little aftershave cologne she'd pilfered from a boyfriend, but that would be weird. She noticed right away the difference in the attention she got from the men, or rather, the lack of attention. She was miserably depressed and angry, but she no longer felt as helpless as she had months before. God forbid her mother bring home a junkie alkie who liked little boys. The train slowed, pulling into the next station. Shapes formed from the deep shadows and charcoal gray concrete that was growing paler as the station lights materialized ahead. The train stopped. The annoying glaring lights inside the car came on, buzzing like fat houseflies caught between two window panes. Just outside her window was an indent in the wall, an outlet for maintenance crew. It was a rectangle-shaped black hole. There was a figure there facing the wall, just the silhouette of a scarecrow, like a snowman made from bags of coal. As if it felt her looking, the figure turned around. His face was dark, dirty, bearded, but the whites of his eyes glowed with the yellowy amber light. He was staring straight at her. His black lips were moving as if he was speaking to her. Panic rose like bile deep in her esophagus. She blinked and looked around to see if anyone else was as curious about the man as she was. None of the three others were looking up from their laps. When she looked back, the man was gone. Had he really been there at all, or had she manifested the image from her own introspections of her mother's chosen company? The lights went out. A few seconds later, they came back, but at half strength and amber-tinted. "Please be calm, everyone." She jumped at the sudden voice. She'd forgotten the speaker was just above her head. "We will be moving shortly towards the next station. There you will disembark." The otherworldly voice was deep and reassuring, though somewhat crackled by the old metal speaker face. "There's been an accident in the tunnel about a mile ahead. You all need to disembark here. We will be forced to shut down until it is safe to continue travel through this section. Sorry for the inconvenience. Be safe." Georgie had been in her own world, the world of her Lucasian brain. She recalled how late it had been when she'd left home with the maybe intention of never going back. Just, going, into a new galaxy far, far away. She glanced down at her watch, the old Seiko she'd found on the coffee table one morning on her way out the door for school. 5 minutes to 2 a.m. Great. She looked around the underground train car. She was alone. She prayed the deep, reassuring voice would come again. It did not. The train doors slid open with a whoosh and a puff of steamy petrol and urine-infused air. Georgie grabbed her backpack and stepped onto the platform. A policeman was escorting an elderly man towards the exit stairs to the world above. She wanted to follow just to be near safe-looking people, but where would she go up there? Home? Ugh, voices caught her ear, and the high-pitched laughter of cruel boys. She turned in time to see 2 older teenaged boys disappear around a thick cement pylon. Their sturdy body language suggested they were up to no good. She heard a growl and realized it was a human voice, but could not decipher any words. She loped as silently as she could, like Sylvester tiptoeing after Tweety Bird. "I thought I saw putty tat." Only she felt she was the tiny yellow canary foolishly stalking a very mean and perhaps rabid cat. She almost giggled, but as she came upon the pylon and snugged up against it, she heard gurgling, garbling, guttural sounds, then a sound that was definitely laughter. Not the young laughter she expected from the 2 hoodlums, but chortling from the deepest pit in hell. She dared to peek around the pylon. The dim corridor there in the subway tunnel by the restrooms was crimson and wet. At first, she thought the boys had been graffiting, but that illusion was dashed when she saw the bodies. Or what was left of them. It was the lower leg in the Dayton boot with the white gleam of bone glowing from the black and maroon mess of the rest of the body that made Georgie freeze. The blood in her veins slushy ice. The second body was a teenaged boy-shaped lump, equally red and wet and broken. A homeless man with a gnarly twisted walking stick stood over the remains. As she watched, a second vagrant slunk from the shadows of the tunnel. His lips were moving, and as he drew closer to his vagrant buddy, the words became audible. Pokeman, Pokeman, poke, amen, Pokeman. Vagrant one had with the stick had been the one she'd locked eyes with. She felt it in her wintry marrow. Georgie thought, Pokeman? This is so weird. How do they even know? Both men were in ragged clothes, black, gray, grimy. They appeared sooty like mine workers. Even from her hiding spot 20 feet away, she could smell them. The first looked towards his decrepit buddy. The second man nodded enthusiastically and growled, Pokeman, Pokeman. Vagrant one grinned and bent, and poked the bloody lump with his walking stick. Nothing moved, and both men howled like wolves with glee. They went to the second grisly mass, and both cried out, Pokeman, Pokeman. Vagrant two pulled a crooked black umbrella from his dark ragged coat and poked at the body. Pew pew pew, said the other, just like a Star Wars spoof of the ray guns. Any second she expected to hear the wahizzzes of a lightsaber. She ran out into the subway station and headed for the stairs. Dark shadows were gathered on the landing and seemed to be coming down, great hulking forms that seemed like men. Then she heard the mutterings, garbled, from mush mouths. Pokeman, poke the moan, ha ha ha. She raced into the tunnel. Georgie was discombobulated from the surrealness she felt at discovering the boys antagonizing a homeless man, having that man somehow not only kill them but tear them to shreds. This can't be real, I'm in my own movie in my bed. But she knew. After 10 minutes she realized she had not gone back but had continued on into the tunnel towards the next station. It wasn't quite pitch black but close. Just as darkness threatened to take over, those dim amber lights glowed from ahead. Must be the next station, the one where the accident had stopped service on this route. Ahead of her the tunnel curved and she could see the walls and platform of the station. There were 2 corpses in uniforms, 4 people, and a body in a bag. Not a single living person, just definitely dead ones. She ducked behind a trash collecting vehicle. It was orange, and on its flatbed was a collection of stinky bins. As her eyes took in the niches in the tunnel walls across from the platform, she watched as shadows took the shapes of men. Vagrant one came into the light first. They shuffled towards the carnage like zombies on parade. Skluff, skluff, skluff. Pokeman, said Vagrant one. The one behind him said it too, and then more voices added to the strange mantra. The homeless men pulled out their sticks, umbrellas. One had a long thin ski pole and began poking the bodies. She watched, frozen in terror, sick with fascination. She was trying to remember everything. Dang, I should be recording this with my iPhone. It would make a great introduction into the world of G. Lucason's Nevermind. Reaching for the device, they might detect her movements. She felt as if she'd been tumbled by waves, like curlers over a surfer. Vagrant one bent over the cop closest to her, perhaps 15 feet away, and, as she watched, lowered his grizzled, dark and dirty face to the dead cops and chewed his face off. Young Inug Young. The man with the umbrella. Vagrant 2 poked the corpse's leg. Poke da man. Georgie understood then that they were saying a variant of poke the man. She almost laughed out loud. But no, oh gosh no, this was too insane. She backed around the pylon and heard the decrepit men raise their voices. Pokeman, go gone new, one said. Have to Google that one. Vagrant one lifted his grimy face and looked where she was hiding after she had made a noise. She had only screamed inside. She was sure of it. Vagrant 2 looked up as well. He grinned at her. His teeth were full of gore between dark brown stubs more like tombstones than teeth. His face running with blood, slick black in the noxious yellow light. At that moment, all the vagrants turned to Georgie, their dim eyes like lighthouses coming to life and following the trek of a wayward ship. Oh. As they all moved towards her, zombie-like, she looked around for an out. She could have run back into the tunnel, but a huge dark figure to her left she'd mistaken for a dead body suddenly started moving. Georgie was elated. A survivor. The huge shadow lumbered into the light. It was an alligator, and contrary to popular belief, it was fast on the ground. Vagrant one howled in pure agony as the gator chomped his left leg below the knee. Crunch. Bones splintered, blood geysered a thick spray over the concrete. Splat. The vagrant went down, and the gator separated his head from his body, the arms still flailing about, flapping like the wings of a chicken with its head cut off. Georgie heard the shuffling, slapping of feet taking off down the tunnels in both directions. She was flabbergasted and felt close to fainting. The alligator craned its massive lumpy head towards her and grinned like only a gator can, mischievously, as if the joke was on her. A familiar and reassuring voice spoke, not to her but to the alligator. "Good job, Archie. May she rest in peace now. Oh, this is Georgie, by the way." The voice of the train conductor. Georgie turned towards it, and there he was. In a crisp blue uniform with white shirt and pressed trousers. It was an old-school uniform they no longer wore. He was rakishly handsome, with a short, cropped beard. The alligator that was real looked at the ghost, grinning that wonderfully rakishly evil-looking grin. Not cop, but a conductor. "Sorry, babe, to not be around. I fucked up, no time now to explain, girl. You're too young to be out here." The ghost hesitated. "You and I have taken care of Carolina Joy's spirit, and she may rest now, Archie, and I needed your alive spirit here to lure the evil one out from his hole. You shared the same essence." "Dad?" The conductor ghost nodded. "I can't stay. Your journey will start when you leave here. You will be safe with Archie by your side until you decide what it is you want to do." He winked at her, tossed a key. "Take the key to my apartment." Georgie swayed on her feet. She felt like an 18th century lady about to faint from a tight corset. She was confused but understood what her father had been saying. She raised a small pale hand towards the alligator as her father's ghost started disintegrating into the tiny specks you saw on old-timey television when the station went off the air. The alligator came to her hand and grinned. Strips of skin and the bits of gore from her sister's killer adorned the alligator's teeth. Cage Rider by Jed Cope. There's something about being inside a car that speaks of what it is to be. He thinks this to himself as the ribbon of tarmac unfurls before him. He wonders why this has never struck him before now. Encased in the car, he sees the world outside in a way that it cannot see him. From the outside he is sleek, shiny and smooth. Inside he is so very different. Inside he knows different. Inside the car, he is no longer naked, nor is he weak. The car makes him dare to believe that he could be forever. He's always loved cars, not liked, loved. His first word wasn't mummy or daddy, it was car. When he couldn't sleep, his folks would put him on the back seat of their car and drive around the block. He'd be flat out and smiling before they were halfway through the journey. He never asked them how it was that they had known to do that. Now he will never know. Glancing in his mirror, he looks back into his past for an answer, knowing that it is not there, not anymore. The mirror distorts his view, but he uses it all the same. He uses them all, 3 mirrors looking back. Clear right now. Nothing of value to see, but he knows that in the next instant there may be danger lurking at his shoulder. 3 paranoid eyes teaching him wariness and anxiety, urging him to take his eyes off the road to attend to what might be. He's aware enough to know that were he to do that, he would be leaving the present moment and risking all of his futures. Driving is living. Driving is being in the present moment. Driving is life. There is nothing else, only interruptions and noise. So why is it that his mind wanders and explores and takes him to places far from this spot on the road? He does his best thinking inside a car. There's something out of whack with that. He knows. This isn't thinking. Not really, it isn't. What it is the result of all the thinking he did before he pulled on his seatbelt and fired the big, old V8 up. Inside the car, all he can attend to is the journey. There can be nothing else. But while he's busy at the wheel, all the buffering in his mind comes to an end and the answers pop out along a sporadic and staccato ticker tape. Long periods of driving, his music drifting through the cabin space. Then an answer trots out of his mind and presents itself to him, whispering of alchemy and magic. Here in his car, he is safe, this is his space, he fits in, he belongs. Cocooned in the metal shell, he is held apart from a cruel and hostile world, and the struggle of living slips away. The real becomes unreal via the filter of the windscreen and ever-watchful mirrors. There is a paradox here. He is aware of that paradox, and he makes an effort not to be seduced by the unreal. He's not foolish. He knows it seeps into him all the same. The trick is to drive well and remain focused. It's all too easy to lapse. He sees it all the time. Drivers with their head bowed as though in prayer, he supposes they are praying in a way, worshipping the gods that reside behind the screen of their phones, sending messages into the unreal and pining for responses from those fickle and callous gods, tuning out and dropping off whilst at the wheel of a 2-ton chariot, willing to make random sacrifices if it will please the gods of a world they will never understand and never be a valid part of. He passed one a mile or so back. The signs were there. Cars have body language. It doesn't take much skill to read them. A car shaping up to make a turn without indicating its intentions. He usually sees that, unless of course the driver is elsewhere and the car is out of control. The car he passed was drifting over the lines in the road, and then it drifted back in the direction of the grass verge. The driver glancing up from their phone to make last-minute adjustments to the steering wheel in order to continue their time elsewhere and elsewhen. He has a creed, a few words he lives by on the open road. Put the danger behind him. He overtook the veering car as it charted a course for the ditch at the side of the road, dropped down a gear and reveled in the rumble of the V8 as it made easy work of accelerating alongside the car that had begun to annoy and unsight him. That is a problem with these drivers. They demand too much attention, and in the aftermath of the noise they create, he knows he is clumsy and distracted. This angers him all the more. These people have no business to be on the road if the road is not their business. Every so often, he will read a news article on a fatal car crash. 9 times out of 10, the driver who caused the crash and the death of others walks away. This is the risk profile, and this is the consequence of bad driving, or in the case of the phone worshippers, non-existent driving. They will kill others, and then they will walk away without a backward glance, their eyes already back on the screen, wishing their lives away in the most painless and ignorant of ways, death by apathy. He always glances across out of control car as he overtakes. He wants to know who it is that he needs to avoid. This time, he is alongside the car and looking over at a 20-something woman. Something happened in the world a decade or so ago. There's a new breed of driver, and they are hyper-aggressive, rivaling even the spam-hued middle-aged men who seem intent on self-inducing a heart attack at the wheel. The woman is startled at the presence of his car. That is how out of it she has been. Her peripheral vision has alerted her to a potential danger, and she awakens violently from her online slumber. He sees her phone describe an upward arc, hitting the windscreen then spiraling away from her. She has lost her lover, and as she experiences this unwanted separation, her mood changes. Her serene and spaced-out face is terribly transformed by the demon of her anger. The mask she wears frightens him, and he has the presence of mind to act decisively. He presses his foot down on the accelerator more by instinct than thought, a primeval reaction to a predator on the attack. How her car misses his, he will never know. His eye is drawn to the side mirror, and he witnesses her attempt to ram him. She has twisted the wheel in a harsh and irrational response to his existence. Her car seems to twist out of shape, the suspension pushed down hard on the front left corner, the opposite side lifting as though the car will leap in the very next instant, and it damn near does. There is an accompanying cry of anguish as she pushes her balled fist into the steering wheel. The horn sounds like a dinosaur robbed of its meal, and she is screaming her rage in accompaniment to that song of rage-filled disappointment. He pulls back onto his side of the road, his eyes on the mirror hanging from the top of the windscreen. Her car has traveled right across the road to the other side. Just before it leaves the road, she twists the wheel in the opposite direction, and the car twists again, doing its dangerous waggle dance, dancing in a display, showing all the other cars where the danger is. She's overcorrected and doesn't seem to be scrubbing any speed off. He watches and toys with the pending dilemma of stopping to assist the homicidal woman. He knows it's the right thing to do and would continue to be the right thing to do, right up until the moment she is thrusting a knife between his ribs. His answer to this dilemma resides in his right foot. It stays exactly where it is. He feels very little relief as he sees her car eventually slow and stop at the side of the road. No doubt she is already ferreting around under the passenger seat to retrieve her lost lover, her overwhelming addiction making her tremble with panic and withdrawal. There is no justice here. She has learned very little. Instead, she has reinforced her mistaken belief that it is not her fault. She is an exception. She is special. Any fault lies beyond the castle walls of her car. Their fault. Always their fault. He is glad that he has survived that encounter, and he is glad that she is behind him. He knows there will be others, but for now he has the open road, and the chances are that he will encounter good and fair drivers for a while yet. He'll still overtake them, but they won't scream at him, nor will they wave at him with sexual hand gestures that they wouldn't dare make without the protection of all that armor, let alone fulfill. Outside their car they are impotent, soft and vulnerable, and all of the bravado leaks from them, a few pitiful tears, and they shrink away from the raging fires of the world that dwarfs them. You have to take the rough with the smooth, he reminds himself. He's calm again now. The surge of adrenaline that the attack caused has now leached from his body, back to levels that don't cause his body to tremble, buck and kick. Normal service is resuming, and with it comes his smile. There is a harmony now. The music soothes him and the journey lifts him. He brakes before the corner and prepares to turn in. Corners are highlights of the journey. He's on the gas and powering out of the corner and entering a new vista. Corners bring change. They deliver new challenges. The tarmac snakes and rolls ahead of him, and he begins to hum to himself. Accompanying this is the low bass rumble of the V8, a sound he could never tire of. The beating heart of his car. The roar of defiance against a world that no longer wants it. He does though. He was meant for this, and it means everything to him. This is where it all makes sense. This is where he makes sense. He presses his foot down on the accelerator, and the roar of the V8 washes over him like the sea. His eyes glaze over as he abandons himself in the moment and to the moment. Cancer. He hears the word as it rises up unbidden from the depths of his mind. The doc delivered the news earlier today. He sat in the too bright surgery, numb to the news of his pending demise. The doc kept talking, but he was no longer listening. Not anymore. What was the point? Those words weren't for him. They were just the doc doing his job and fulfilling his obligations. Not long was all he needed to know. He filled the rest in himself. The quality of his life was on a downward curve, and there would never be an upswing, not even a temporary spike. Nothing to look forward to, except for the end of his days and a finale of pain and suffering to remind him what it was really all about. He knows that he should have thought about his loved ones. Maybe he did, maybe he is. One thing was clear to him, and it was all that he saw. Soon enough he would reach a point in his life when he'd never drive again. Everything would be taken from him piece by piece and bit by bit. Everything dismantled and removed, a regression to nothingness. In the end, he'd lay in a bed and wish for death, laughing at himself. Laughing at the joke he had become, laughing as he saw the punchline, because by then, he was already dead, devoid of utility, useless and purposeless and redundant. So redundant and so badly designed that there was no easy way to switch himself off. Death would have to do that for him. He'd be robbed of choice at the very end. Well, he'd found a way. He did have a choice after all. Time to retire the thirsty old V8 and him both. Time to climb into the saddle, knowing he was already dead but still capable of one last act of rebellion. Thing was, no one else was to know that he was dead, and so he'd ride out one last time, ride along the beach and drive his foe back into the sea. One last ride in this cage of his. All things must end. The bright red motor vehicle left the road and surged through the air, chrome wheels spinning as though they were propelling it through the sky. No one saw the smile on the driver's face, nor the single tear that rolled down his cheek. The tear encapsulated everything in that moment, from sadness to joy. And if you took a closer look, there were myriad images flickering inside it, a matinee showing of a life well lived. The car swooped down from the skies and came to rest on the surface of the water, and for a moment, it looked for all the world like it belonged there, adrift on a river, making its way out to sea, destined for a port in a land far, far away. The car paused and took in its new surroundings. Then it knew what it must do. Dropping its nose, it pushed down into the murky waters, and seeing its final destination, it slipped from view, never to be found. Never to be found.